Hi again. In the spirit of adding and broadening perspective, which is what Rule Omega is all about, I thought it might be nice to do a follow-up to the last video I did, which was about Rule Omega. And myself and three people from a group that get together reasonably regularly to practice our Rule Omega skills, if you like, had a conversation about Rule Omega itself. And so I thought it might be fun for you to watch that. So without any further ado, here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
Rendering unto signal what is signal, so upregulating, and rendering into noise what is noise, so downregulating. Which basically means, assuming that that the person that you're talking to is intelligent and they have information that you don't, and searching for that and seeking to understand it and sort of amplify it, I suppose, while also understanding that whenever you're dealing with something that is a new unknown topic, that there's going to be a lot of searching around, finding ways of expressing things that may not be easy, and the result of that is going to end up being a fair bit of noise, so, or static, so which makes it difficult to hear the signal. So that when you're listening to someone else, you're trying to ignore and suppress that to some extent and bring the bit of truth that's there and amplify it to the point that that everyone else can hear it and that you can continue working on it, as like sort of building up this increasing view of clarity and truth, I suppose.
That was a really good intro, or a really good definition of Rule Omega, I think. One thing that Jonelle brought up, I think, in a previous conversation was the fact that in a conversation, noise can also be coming from the listener. As they're listening, the listener can be bringing their own, their own misunderstandings, their own lenses of trauma that they might be viewing the situation through. And so, exactly as you described, it comes down to both looking for the signal, understanding that the distortion of signal may not entirely be coming from the other person, may not be coming from the other person at all. It may be coming from you, and maybe you have a maybe you define a word wrong and the other person actually makes complete sense. Maybe neither of you are defining a word wrong. Maybe you're just defining the word differently. But because of that difference of definition, there's a complete dissonance between the two of you, when in fact, the underlying signal is actually the same and your meaning is the same. So yeah, that's just, I guess, getting a little bit more specific. But I think I pretty fully back up everything you said, Kylie.
Yeah, I think both of those are very important. I liked your definition, Kylie. I liked your add-on, Heather. That like that is what I thought signal was in the listener, like in what the speaker is saying, but it's like up to the listener to kind of separate, to be like, what is here that is real and what am I making it mean, right? Like what is, like when something happens, an event happens, we don't react to the event, we react to our story about the event, right? So someone's late and we make it mean that they're disrespectful and they don't care about us and we don't know why they're actually late. It's the reaction. And so to ask, right, to find, wait, why were you late, instead of having that whole cascade. And that is like, find the signal is in like the communication between, because both as a speaker who isn't anywhere near as eloquent as I used to be and how I wish I was, I know there's a lot of noise in my signal, and yet I know the signal is really important. And finding that in other people as well, like when someone says something that I am naturally curious about, I'm a much better conversationalist than when I have to fake it, right? When I have to like, oh, how is the weather today? How are you doing? How is, like, I can't even fake that curiosity, that piece of it.
I think one thing that's interesting too is it almost becomes more important. Well, I shouldn't say more important, but maybe more relevant the farther you get away from face-to-face communication, because there's more and more opportunity for it to break down. So, for example, in Facebook comments or on a tweet, really easy to be misconstrued. And yet people very quickly tend to assume they know what someone means, when in fact they may be completely misinterpreting that person's words. So it's interesting. It applies differently in asynchronous communication, because you have to really slow down, and you can't just react. You have to question. You have to kind of ask for specifics, and then the person has to reply. So it can be quite slow, but in the end, what is revealed, and just like Eric, you talked about in your video, you get the cylinder instead of the circle fighting with the square, right, over who's right. Yes, it takes more time, it takes patience, it takes discernment, and you have to be willing to be wrong and sit with that in case you are wrong, which you very well may be. But at the end, if you can reveal a cylinder, it's so rewarding, and it's so much more constructive, and it then allows us to go on and have the next step in whatever conversation might be unfolding, and maybe reveal another cylinder.
And it also helps us to I'm going to phrase this in a way that could be misleading, but I hope I put it right. It also encourages us to seek out disagreement and dispute, because, you know, in that example I gave in the video of the cylinder, if there is no argument between the two of them, then there's no possibility for that revelation, oh my God, it's a 3-dimensional shape, not a 2-dimensional shape. Without the argument, both of them just walk past, oh yeah, it's a rectangle, oh yeah, it's a circle. Do you know what I mean? The argument is itself the thing with do you know what I mean? Without the argument, there is no possibility of the learning. So, you know, I think, yeah, I actually like that analogy on a lot of levels.
It sees disagreement as an opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, which you know, which it certainly is. So you also think about in a similar sort of vein, like diversity versus sameness. Do you know what I mean? If everyone is coming from the same perspective and seeing something as just a square, or everyone is seeing something as just a circle, then you never get as full a picture as you do if you've got, you know, someone kind of going, okay, from this angle it looks like it's, you know, this weird kind of shape like that, you know, which it could if you were just seeing it you know, as a shadow. Someone else is seeing it as the square, someone else is seeing it as the, you know, as the circle, and you kind of put them all together and you get that kind of a picture. But in order to do that, you not only have to have, well, actually maybe even an argument isn't necessary. You just need to have the different perspectives and allow them to be expressed and heard and considered, I suppose.
Coming up for me, while you were talking about that, and the disagreement is the spark, is also the like the community piece of it. Like if you're the only one who sees a square and everybody else sees a circle, that is a hard position to be in. Same with, like, everyone's going to argue that your truth isn't your truth when it's only, like, it isn't any less true. It's still, like, if it was 50-50, it's the same rightness as if it was 90, 10. But if you have no one else backing you up, it's like just the dynamic of a group. It's very different if you're 50-50 or if you're like the 1%, 99% dynamic of discern, finding the noise in the signal, right? Like we let that definitely permeate. That culture is what we go off of, right? Like if you think the moon landing is a hoax, you're ridiculous, even if you've never looked into the moon landing, right? Like, because that's just our natural, what we say in society. And so if you haven't looked into it, that's going to be your go-to. I don't know why I picked that one, but
that's interesting. There's the false positive as well, right? In the signal, there's the reading something as signal which isn't actually signal. Yeah, it comes across to you as signal, but it isn't actually signal. Again, it's your noise turning noise into signal and turning noise into perceived signal, right? which is why I think what Heather was saying before, the idea of speaking back, you know what I mean? Speaking back to people, checking, re-saying what they've said, clarifying words that have been used that can hold multiple definitions is a really, really important part of not ending up in apparent conflict when, as you said, really your signal is actually in alignment, but because of a word you're using that you see differently, it feels like they're out of alignment. I've noticed so many times that apparent arguments actually come down to a definition of a single word that people are using differently.
I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with my husband yesterday around a discussion that's sort of come up sort of through the course of the year in one of his groups about professional courage, and it's that willingness to leave what the group norm or the group understanding is, and to actually express that that different perspective. And when we were talking about it, I said, hey, I wonder if when anyone's talking about that, whether they think about sort of like the first follower or like the second person that's essentially coming in and applying Rule Omega, in that they're listening for that dissenting opinion or that different kind of thing, and upregulating it enough so that the rest of the group or the community can actually hear it as well. Because like one lone person is it's very difficult to be in that position, as Jubilee said. But there's also that other role or other thing that can be done, which is the first person to apply Rule Omega in that setting completely changes the nature of that dissenting viewpoint, so that then it's available for the whole group to listen to.
Interesting things of you talking about like naming what is being said in the group. It reminds me of like the circling dynamic and the feeling of vulnerability of saying like, Heather, I think you said this in a logical sense. I have no problem doing that. Like in what you said is there was a cylinder and there's a circle and a square. Got that. But if it's like the actual, I don't know, like being like, you look like you're frustrated. That piece of it is really hard for me. And I don't know, like to come into, like, I would rather be the person that sees the square when everyone else sees the circle than name that everyone sees the circle and I see the square. Like, I don't know, there's something vulnerable, and thank goodness we have diversity that other people, it's probably the opposite.
There's something sort of different from that, but that I want to put out here, which is that just because you apply Rule Omega and the other person applies Rule Omega doesn't mean you're going to agree. You could still have 99% disagreement. But if you're both coming in good faith and applying Rule Omega, you will find the 1% of resonance and be able to build up something on that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all in agreement, we just aren't communicating well. We can still fundamentally disagree and apply Rule Omega, but we can do it in a way that brings us closer to truth instead of makes us fight and destroy each other.
Sorry, no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
One of these, the very first conversation we had where Eric and I were talking about, honor, and ended up finding that you used honor the way that I use integrity, and I'm not sure about vice versa, but that was a really interesting example of that. It's like that was our signal, was that we're both sort of thinking about the same concept, but in a way the noise was the words themselves. Yeah. Anyway,
language is all we've got, right? But it's far from perfect. And we have to use it carefully, especially when talking about difficult things that you've not talked about before. You've got to be. It's exactly what you said, Kyla. I mean, you summed it up so perfectly. It's exactly that. You've got to try and upregulate your own signal as best you can, given that you've never really talked about this stuff before and it's going to be clumsy. And you, as the listener, try and upregulate my signal as well, right? I like that. I don't conceive it in quite those terms, the upregulation and downregulation, but it's actually I'm finding it a more and more useful way of looking at it.
Stolen from Jordan.
was wondering what was coming. If we're having a conversation, whether there's multiple of us or one of us, we could bring our own selves to the table and we have our own perspective, and that's rule omega, right? That we're like trying to find the signal in the noise. But starting from a somewhat blank state, not that the people are blank slates, is that like creating an organization, creating anything from the ground up, where we're looking for what is the 1% we agree on, and then what can we build from there? What is the 10%, whatever the percentage is that we agree with? Because I feel that is a big sticking point for Game B moving forward. It's like everyone has their individual projects, their own individual, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we can't also start something from the ground up, can't also be, you know what I mean? Like, what is, I don't know, there's something different between the group and like where we're starting on different sides, we're trying to find the commonality versus finding the commonality and then building from there. There's something that's like, that's kind of the game I want to play. It's like building it from the ground up of like, what is the culture? What are the rules / no rules, right? Like Omega rule is, I think, submission. And then building it from that point of like, what is the thing we want to create? What is the process we want to use? What is like, and building it from the ground up is all I wanted to was sparking.
I feel like, yeah, there's maybe something, I don't know if this applies there, but something about how even when people are fundamentally coming from different points of view and they disagree to a large extent, and there's very little common signal, if they're using the principles of rule omega, they can still come together around that small percentage of signal that they share and work together. Because the way rule omega works, it's almost like the noise then just becomes like, we accept the noise, we accept that that's part of the equation, and it's okay for it to be there. And then that allows us to work with people who have vastly different opinions from our own on things that we feel very strongly about. Because at the end of the day, if we can work with people like that and they can work with us, then we can avoid a lot of conflict. So yeah, I don't know if that strikes a chord with anything you were saying or not.
Something that came up for me while Jubilee was talking was something that came up in a conversation I had with Rolandus a while ago. He's really into nonviolent communication, and he is of the opinion, and I have to say it makes a great deal of sense to me, he's of the opinion that almost all conflict can be resolved if you can successfully separate needs from strategies, that almost all conflicts are over strategies, right? How to accomplish a given need. But actually, when you come right down to it, the needs that we both have here are very clear and can be agreed upon, right? Without really any dispute at all. It's how you go about meeting those needs that is the dispute. And so if you can start from that point of, I acknowledge your needs, you acknowledge my needs, we both accept that, it just starts a space from which you can maybe build strategies that aren't in conflict with each other.
Yeah, which is maybe also a great point around the fact that rule omega is one tool, and there are many, many tools in this area, and the more that we can be aware of them and apply them, the easier this whole process becomes.
Thing about the relationship there between needs and signal. It's like a radio channel or a radio frequency that we're all probably pretty good and quick at tuning into, because it's something that we all sort of have in common. It's kind of like, it's almost like a language, you know what I mean? It's like, when we have like shared vocabulary, then it's much easier to, it's much easier to do things like achieve coherence. It's much easier to pick out the signal. And I'm thinking with something like needs as well, because they're so, or at least some of them are so common to all of us, so that it also probably makes it easier to pick out that signal. So if we focus on that, and then kind of build around it. Do you know what I mean? Like, rather than starting with a concept that nobody knows, like trying to build up a signal based on that is probably difficult. Whereas if you're starting with something that you can acknowledge easily and then build out from there, yeah, it might be easier. Anyway, it just occurred to me when I was listening to you there, Eric, talking about the nonviolent communication.
Yeah, so you explain the concepts, the starting point of the explanation of the concept is identifying the needs that it is purporting to meet, right? That's what grounds it in something of substance. Yeah, it's a real thing because it's meeting a need which we can all identify with, because these needs are, as you say, largely universal, right?
Somebody seems to be at my door for some reason. I'm gonna go answer them. That's my need at the moment.
How much have either of you heard about nonviolent communication, or how much do either of you know about it?
Hardly anything.
Yeah, only a very small bit in theory.
Yeah, same.
It's kind of, it's applying principles from, you know, I suppose that are sort of dotted throughout, like everything I've ever learned about psychology, if that makes sense. It's just taking a particular focus on it. So I guess I have been very lazy and not felt the need to dig too much into that particular framework.
I think one could become a much more skilled is the wrong word. I'm not quite sure what the right word is for Rule Omega practitioner, if I can use. I'm not quite sure what the right word would be to describe it. Anyway, I think NVC could really inform the process of Rule Omega. I think there's a great deal to learn just in terms of how to conceptualize the dynamics of, you know, how conflict arises through the failure to recognize a need or the confusion of strategy with need. I just think I think it's a really, really, really useful lens with which to see it through.
I really like nonviolent communication. The first time I was introduced to it was through, there's an hour-long talk by the person who invented it. I can never remember his name, Marshall something or other, or something Marshall. And it's a good talk. I don't know if anyone's posted it on the Game B space before, but it's part of to get into the transition, which is just a website about transitioning to a resource-based economy, and she has her own. So anyway, she has a set of things you have to do to move through the levels, and one of the first things is to watch the nonviolent communication. It's one of the longer videos because it's an hour long, but I've watched it a couple times, and it's pretty powerful. But I wanted to mention what Kylie had said, that like this is like something where it's easily accessible because we all have the same basic needs. I don't feel that at all because I don't access them easily. I don't access my own emotions or my own needs. So I'm like, have the surface level. I have to go in. It's like when I've watched that, I'm like, I need to print off a document, put it on my mirror that is like, here are the human needs. So when I'm feeling emotionally triggered or something's happening, and I can look at it and be like, oh yeah, that one actually is more so. I think there's a lot of things that because we're good at them and it comes so easily to us, we assume that this must be a like common, you know what I mean? Like we all, like needs are so universal. Like there's days I forget to eat or drink water, like that level of not realizing my own basic needs. So forget if my need is connection and I'm trying to meet it, you know, through some ridiculous format. And I think I'm more self-aware because I know that about myself and I've been seeking out how to figure that out than a lot of people who are in the same boat. They don't, like, that's not a good assumption that we make, that that's broad, that everyone has that, especially maybe in the Game B space because we're intellectual a lot, even though we're also doing the like heart-based piece of it. And to honor that diversity doesn't mean to like, then let's ignore everyone's needs. Like we need people like you who that is easy for to maybe help the rest of us who it's less easy for. I don't know what that looks like, but I'd like.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little up regulation, down regulation there. So Jubilee, I hear you absolutely on the specifics. Like we may not know what our own needs actually are, like the specific ones, and we may not recognize someone else's specific needs either. So what I was actually thinking about more was the more meta thing of that humans have needs. you know what I mean, and that they exist, that and that's something that we can relate to. So it's basically it's kind of it's the grounding and the that sort of that core thing of going, yes, you know what, we do actually all need to eat, we do actually all need to sleep, you know. It's kind of that thing, you know, even if you're not good at it in the moment, or in a, you know, in a specific, or, you know, like you might forget to eat, or someone else might forget to sleep, or something like that. It's like, it's still, there's still that
If I may, that's bad strategies, right? That's bad strategies. That's nothing to do with the needs. That's executing bad strategies to meet the needs. You know, it's again really important to keep these things separate from each other. You not eating when you're hungry, that's bad strategizing. That's nothing to do with the need. Does that make sense?
Actually, I wanted to ask you, Eric, to expand on that, what you said, confusion of strategy with need. So this could be a good point to do that.
Oh God! All right, let me think if I can come up with an example real quick. All right, so let's say that. Okay, so yeah, there's a river and there's two towns either side of the river, and you know, the fact that there's a river between them is a problem, and so they all get together and they decide that they need a bridge, right, to connect the two towns, and they argue about what kind of bridge it's going to be, blah 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 blah. And so the argument is being centered around a strategy, because the bridge is a strategy. The need is to connect the two towns. The strategy to do so is the bridge. But while they're arguing about what kind of bridge to build, they haven't even considered the possibility of a tunnel, for example, or an airport, or a heliport, or a ferry, or whatever, you know what I mean? So this is what I mean about getting confused between strategies and needs. You know, if you keep the need clear at the outset, you know, the bridge has become the need, but actually not. It's not the need. The bridge is the strategy. The need is to connect the towns. And so if you kept the need clear all the way through, then the possibility for other strategies to meet that need could emerge. This is the difficulty of getting confused between strategies and needs. The strategy becomes confused with the need, right? And so you're meeting the strategy. You're not meeting the need, you're meeting the strategy.
That's really clear. Thank you.
This actually brings to mind something else that might be relevant here, which is from a Buddhist perspective, looking at being able to separate sort of who someone is in how they present to the world, or their, I don't want to say surface, but their self, and who someone is sort of at a deeper essential level beneath that, and being able to recognize that those are separate things, and that we all bring something that is the same, that has needs, to any conversation, and that all the stuff we stack on top of that, that's different in all of us, is just that. It's just stacked on top, like the strategy. And when we conflate the two, just like with needs and strategies, that's when we run into trouble, because then we think that all these surface things that we see are the person, when in fact that's not what they are at all.
It's interesting. So what came up when you started talking about appearance was signal and noise in that as well, right? When you meet someone and they're like tattoos and they have a certain, and you put, or, you know, a certain race, a gender, anything, where you're going to have bias and stuff that's put on them, and to find the truth, the signal that is who they are, is almost even more important than the signal in the conversation, right? Like, my humanity sees the humanity in you, whether you're, you know, look like you come off of an Amish place, or you look like you know, are a sex worker. It doesn't matter. There's like humanity there. There's the essence and the needs that are.
Yeah, that's so interesting to agree on the on that signal and noise thing as well. So one of the odder things that I've done in terms of like getting myself trained in various things is as an image consultant. And that's one of the things that we sort of think about a lot as well, is congruence between what is the essence of a person, and then the way that they present. Because as much as we don't want to, we do all, you know, quickly start to form judgments of people, not necessarily as in good or bad, but in what we feel that we can expect from them. So we use stereotypes, and that was actually a huge learning for me, because I'd like to generally think that I don't do that with people. Like, I don't judge them based on how they look. And we did this exercise. There was a bunch of us, and we had different photos, and we had to just, write down our thoughts about, like, how old is this person? How many kids do they have? What kind of car do they drive? What's their job? And so on and so forth. So, so we all wrote these things down as best we could. And then, from completely different cultures, the results that we got were almost exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we were all making exactly the same judgments based on just a photo of somebody. So, but yeah, that's that same kind of thing. It's like you can intentionally or unintentionally create noise in your appearance. So, so someone who, like puts tattoos, or, does the pink hair, or any of those kinds of things, it's like they're expressing something. And then you have to work out underneath that, like, what is it that they're actually trying to express? What is the, what's the true signal, and what's noise again? Like, is it something that is, it's like noise is almost like the lack of congruence in that, in that first instance. It's, when it doesn't compute, when it's not what you expect, then
absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, like, the because I very consciously spent a lot of my life trying to conform and feeling like I never quite got there. Like, I didn't know how to fit in at work or school or that kind of thing. Once I gave it up, once I'm like in a giant onesie, I'm like, I'm an adult, I can wear what I want to wear. I want to wear what's comfortable. I put off a different thing, right? Like, I'm like, I'm all noise. That's okay. I'm good with that. You have to get to know me to know who I am. I'm not going to like necessarily present it on the outside. Although a giant elephant onesie is kind of like pretty how it is. But like, because I don't know, like, I want an authentic world. I want people to dress and be who they are, whether that is real or not, signal or noise. But this, like, it was like the Trump thing I talked about earlier of like, when people overestimate, it's like, well, wear a suit or no one's going to take you seriously. And it's like, but we've collectively decided that. And we can see that people in suits aren't really more respectable. So like, at what point do we let go of that bias? Maybe never. Maybe I do just have to own that I need to be more business, but I don't want to. And then like sexism and everything else comes into it of like, men can be billionaires and wear t-shirt and jeans, and women are expected to, like, care about fashion. And I just never have. But anyway, I'm gonna stay with that for like the signal. I want the signal from my noise and communication. I want that to get better. Whereas I kind of just want my appearance to get more noisy. Or like my own internal signal, right? Of like, this is what I want to wear because I want to wear it, not because it puts on a certain thing. And other people, that is their true essence as well. Like, they're like, yes, and I want to look good. Cool, awesome. Go as fashionista as you want. Just not expecting it from like everyone else.
So in a way, there would be zero noise in your appearance from you, but there might be noise in other people reacting. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
But that's entirely unavoidable, right? I mean, whether it's blue hair and tattoos, or whether it's an elephant onesie, or whether it's a suit and a tie, we are going to, and it'll be different for different people. I hear what you said before, Kylie, but nevertheless, there is going to be some variation. I mean, for example, Jubilee associates suits with, being shady and corrupt, you know what I mean? At least as much as people that don't wear suits. So, they will have different associations, but I don't think there's ever, I mean, it's a lovely thought not to judge people on their appearances, right? But I think it's a forlorn thought. I think the best we can do is know that we're doing it and not pay too much attention to those judgments. Yeah, not put any stock in them. I think that's the best we can do. I don't think we can prevent making them.
I think that is real. I'm just going to mention there's 3 minutes left, and I'm not going to jump on the next call because I have to do Christmas stuff that I was already finished cleaning the kids' room, all that good stuff. But
no problem.
Yeah,
it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm just going to shove something in, hopefully before you leave, Jubilee. Just to sort of pull together everything that we were talking about there. It's like, what is noise and what is signal is highly dependent on context. So some of it's the listener, but some of it's going to be the group. Some of it's going to be, you know, the cultural expectations and so on. So, you know, within the banking world, not wearing a suit would be very, very noisy. But within like an artist's world, wearing a suit would be very, very noisy. Anyway, I think
Unless it was a really cool and trendy suit, that would be different.
One of my friends is Muslim, and she moved in with me. She wore the hijab, and while she was in Vancouver, she ended up not wearing it. And I thought her like faith was kind of slipping away, and she was like, "No, the point of a hijab is to fit in, is to like have people not look at your appearance." And here, that is done better without one. I was like, "Oh, how weird is that?" Like, it's more about the essence of the thing.
Yeah.
About, like, the rule is to keep your head covered, right? It's like, oh, interesting.
Oh, isn't that a beautiful little sort of micro analogy of game A versus game B, right? Yeah, the game A would require you to wear a hijab because that's the rule, whereas game B requires you not to wear a hijab because a hijab is about not being seen. Yeah, it's about following the spirit and not the I like that. I like that. That's a really nice little, don't know what you call it, but it's a very nice one.
Mm-hmm.